Today on HooptieDoodle, I'm pondering how in the world I'm going to make this triple clamp thing for the Honda Grom come together. And I'm going to start by figuring out how I'm going to do the steering stem for it. This is actually a Harley triple clamps and steering stem that I got off a wrecked bike off eBay. The first step is to take this top clamp off. It should slide right off of here. Bam. And then we got this guy here, the bearing, this bottom bearing, will it also come out? I suspect not. All right, so then we've got a little circlip on the bottom. We've got some circlip pliers here. All right, for this next step, I brought out the press. So I'm gonna go ahead and arrange this guy on the bottom to go through that little hole, and then we're gonna try and press it straight down from here, straight out the bottom. And just shim that a little bit. I think that'll work. There we go. Out. There it is, man. Look at that. That's what we want. All right, so I totally was planning on using this Harley stem as my stem for the Grom. That's why I bought the Harley triple clamps in the first place. But now that I've got the stem in hand, I see that it is tapered, where it is skinnier in the middle and then thicker on the ends where the bearings sit. And I knew that I was going to have to cut this stem in order for it to work on my triple clamps, because my triple clamps are skinnier than the Harley ones. But now looking at the stem, I realize because of this tapering aspect of it, if I cut the end of it off, I'm going to be cutting off the part that is thick enough to hold the bearing, and I'll be left with the thinner part where the bearing is going to be loose in there. Now I'm left with a dilemma. Do I try and use the Harley one by welding on extra material and then machining it down, or do I just start from scratch and machine my own steering stem? So I throw this guy on here. So, the bearing on top, etc. It's about 2 3/8. 2 3/8 of an inch extra on the bottom here.
2 3/8, that would be 6/8, which would then be 3/4 of an inch for the actual plates.
Triple clamps, so to speak, on here. So, all right, so I'm ultimately going to be cutting 1 5/8 off the end of this thing. And that is going to leave me with the necessary, I'm going to need to basically add about 1 inch, 3/4 to 1 inch extra material onto this thing if I want to use this stem. All right, I'm vacillating a little bit here because I do have a 1 inch round stock here, which I could make my own steering stem out of on the lathe. And if I weld this thing, that's going to get messy and grinding it down, and I still got to cut it, and then that's a lot of work. Time-wise, it might just the same amount of time just to make my own, a new one here. All right, and then I'm trying to determine how much on here. You can see like this one has, hopefully you can see the change, the sort of color change there. There's a thickness change, so it's thicker down here. And so I need it to be thick enough for the bearings, and how much space do I need for the bearings and the plate on the bottom. And measuring this guy, it turns out that's 1 inch total for both of them. So I'm just trying to write this stuff down, making myself a little diagram. Really simple, it just helps me to remember what I'm doing. All right, so I think I'm gonna machine a new one myself on the lathe. That's what I'm leaning towards doing at the moment. And you'll note that I spent all this money on this Harley part. It was like $60, which was the cheapest one I could find on eBay that met my parameters. It basically turns out I'm not gonna use it. So did I spend that money for nothing? Not in my mind, because in my mind, this is very useful to have this in hand and to know what the stock Harley thing looks like, what it feels like, what it measures, how everything is laid out on there, because that's what I've got on the bike is a stock Harley steering neck. And so to have the steering stem and just to know, to see how it goes together is really helpful for me. Never having seen one before and not having done this before. In terms of education, this was well worth the $60. I didn't know that the top part had this little threaded bolt on there, and that was how it held the top clamp on or anything like that. And so that's super helpful information. I think this is well worth it, even though I'm not going to use it. All right, so now let's get this piece of round stock set up on the lathe. All right, so I'm breaking out the big guns here, and I put a battery in my calipers. That's because we mean business, serious business. All right, so let's measure the stock, the Harley one, the original one. Let's see what kind of measurements we get on this in terms of diameter. That's 1/1000th under where the actual bearings go. Let's measure the actual bearings. And the bearings themselves, they're like 5/1000ths under. All right, so I've amended my drawing here so that it sort of shows me the measurements, the diameters that I'm going for on the lathe, so I can use my calipers over there. At the top, it's just about the same as the bearing diameter, on the inside diameter of the bearing. So the bearing will slide on there, but it will be tight. And then it will get down here, slide real easy, then get down here, we have this interference fit, and then we have to press the bearing on there. All right, so I've got the 1-inch rod in the lathe right now. All right, so this is actually not going to work. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this out. You can see on here, see the shiny part here. And then as we rotate it, it's not so shiny anymore. It's because this thing, the rod itself, it's not straight. This has a slight sort of bend or whatever to it. And so as it rotates in the lathe, I'm getting the high point here and I'm getting that, but the low point, I'm not touching that. And that's problematic because this thing I have such fine tolerances on this. I have 1 inch. There's a part on our steering stem that we need it to be 1 inch, and it's gonna be less than that on this guy. So I have gone ahead and gotten a steel rod here that is 1 1/4 inch in diameter, so that we can machine this thing down, and then it should be perfectly straight the way we want it. All right, so we didn't actually make anything in this episode. I apologize for that, although we do end up making something in the next episode, which is this guy. And I'm gonna take you through the whole thing in the next episode, from the rod here that we start with to the finished product. But I bring you this episode just to demonstrate that sometimes mistakes happen. Sometimes you do a lot of work for absolutely nothing, or at least I do. And so nothing wrong with that. Happens to everybody, happens all the time. And what you do get is a learning experience. And what I learned today was that you gotta start with a bigger rod. You gotta start with a bigger rod, folks. And so if you wanna machine stuff down, I'm new to machining. I don't really have that much machining experience. Like, I'm still learning how to use this lathe over here. And so, but I learned today you really have to give yourself greater tolerances to start with so that you can machine stuff down, because these things aren't perfectly straight to begin with. So that was the HooptieDoodle lesson today for me. So thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.